how INTJs see the 16 personalities. INTJs see ESTPs as fellow rationalists, but also ridiculous. INTJs see ESTPs as people with a similar talent for realism, objectivity, and logic, but they diverge in terms of what they do with those traits. IJ and EP types differ greatly in terms of their overall style and the way they approach things. IJ types, so INTJs, INFJs, ISTJs, and ISFJs, tend to be more controlled and controlling. EP types, ESTPs, ESFPs, ENTPs, and ENFPs, tend to be more spontaneous and chaotic. Therefore, INTJs can be annoyed at how fast and loose ESTPs play the game of life. How they might not take certain things seriously and tend to shoot from the hip in most situations. ESTPs will get annoyed at INTJs trying to control things, being overly planful, and not just jumping in and taking action as the first step. Essentially, they'll often see INTJs as overthinkers, and INTJs often see them as thoughtless, which to them is ridiculous, since what is the point of being a thinking type if you're going to be thoughtless at times? INTJs see INFJs as people wasting all their abilities on those pesky humans. INTJs treat FE with immense skepticism. If you are charming and slick, it might come across as slimy to them. They will think, if you can't get by simply saying what you actually think and how you think it, then there's a problem somewhere. So INTJs will often see INFJs as focusing on people-related things to a fault. That being said, inevitably INTJs will find INFJs relatable because they are the other NI-dominant type. So there'll be a kinship that comes from that shared frame of reference, that similar lens through which they view the world. Even if they don't come to the same conclusions on things, the ways in which they come to conclusions will be the same. INTJs see ENTJs as more adaptable and forceful, but reckless and impulsive versions of themselves. These two types can look very similar. If you have a more withdrawn, intellectual, and academic ENTJ, they will seem INTJ-like. If you have an INTJ who's more forceful and energetic, they'll seem ENTJ-like. I have a video on the channel somewhere comparing and contrasting them. INTJs generally like to think, ponder, analyze, plan, and strategize before taking bold action. ENTJs are more than happy to just jump right in. I think that INTJs will admire this trait. In fact, as they mature and develop, it's something that they will aim to emulate. That adaptable nature of ENTJs, their ability to balance being serial planners, which they certainly are, with adjusting to real-time events and reworking the plan when needed, is a great skill for INTJs to incorporate into their lives more and more as time goes on. However, INTJs will also see ENTJs as being overly impulsive, reckless, and curiously, sometimes too emotionally reactive. ENTJs have that imbalance with FI being their inferior function. Sometimes that can rise up and take over in unhealthy ways. INTJs see themselves as people who enjoy the benefits and suffer the pains of swimming against the tide. There is something inherently iconoclastic about INTJs, in my view. A renegade and rebellious spirit. But unlike with other types, who might express this in overt, in-your-face ways, INTJs imbue this mindset into what they do, into their work, their ideas, their passions, and hobbies. INTJs are just wired to spot ways in which things could be improved, ways in which, by definition, people are getting things wrong. This constantly pits them against many mainstream notions of how things should be. They will find that they have to swim against the tide, often in life. That determination and grit that characterizes them is something that often gets cultivated and hardened because of this. It's something that they need. They can often feel isolated because of this independent nature, but it is also the source of much of their strength too. So I think that INTJs might have a strangely conflicted conception of themselves. Both the pros and the cons are quite stark. INTJs look at ESFPs and think, what is it doing? Why is it doing it? That's kind of entertaining and fun. Why do I like it? These two types have the same functions in the opposite order, which, in theory, should give relationships between them a healthy balance where both types compensate for the weakness of the other. The systematic schema and the kinetic dynamo. These two types are like odd socks of surprisingly complementary colors. It works somehow. I have wondered whether Walter White and Jesse Pinkman are an INTJ ESFP duo. I think that paints a picture of the sheer brilliance and craziness that can occur between them. ESFPs know what they want, even if it's often in an immediate sense, and they go for it. INTJs respect that about them. They admire it, in fact. It does, in some sense, speak to their own nature as well. Both types are wanty. Is that a word? They want things, to do things, to achieve things, to experience things. And whether it's in friendships or romantic relationships, they can give each other that. Don't misunderstand, INTJs see ESFPs as far from being hinged, but maturity depending, there can be an electric synergy between them. INTJs would see ENFPs as creative catalysts and conduits. There are so many ways in which two types can overlap. For these two, they have a few things in common. The first is the general imbalance of being intuitive dominant types, and therefore having a sensing function as their inferior one. They also have the same two middle functions, but in a different order. And now for a very convoluted and hard to follow analogy. Okay, let's say you're in a fantasy realm, where there are villages peppered throughout the landscape, and you're commissioned by your wealthy but reclusive patron to map out the area, to discover things, to explore, and return back to your patron and tell them what's out there, and how things work in different places. And any Dom, so the ENFP in this case, would stay in one area for a little while, explore many different places within that town or village, then move on to the next place once the novelty wears off. They would be taking a lot of information in, experiencing things, far more than most people, but not staying anywhere too long. I also imagine them, eventually, cycling back around to those same places and exploring different parts of them whilst drawing upon the knowledge they've gained, both in their previous travels there and elsewhere. NIDOMs, so the INTJs in this case, would go to an area and slowly take it in, not indulging in the same level of variety, but instead going deeper into things, perhaps doing the same things over and over for a while. Once they feel settled and that they have a handle on an area, that they understand important and fundamental things about it, then they'll move on. INTJs will see ENFPs as people who will drag them to new areas much more quickly. Because of this, INTJs will kind of be forced to take in a greater variety of data, experiences, and ideas than they typically would over the same time period. But because they are who they are, their NI will start to analyze patterns, find connections, narrow down on commonalities between what they've observed. INTJs see ENFPs as accelerators and stimulators of new ideas within them. People who drag them slightly out of their comfort zone without it actually being uncomfortable. INTJs see ISTJs as similarly capable as them, but with their powers pointed in odd directions. I've heard Michael Pierce say that the title of logical mastermind would be most aptly applied to ISTJs. INTJs would be the intuitive masterminds, people who can make leaps of intuition and insight without always knowing exactly how. ISTJs, on the other hand, are the masters of detail. INTJs sometimes see ISTJs as people who can't see the forest for the trees, or are focusing on one specific tree in the forest, or one specific part of a specific tree. Although INTJs appreciate meticulousness and attention to detail, they will often see ISTJs as not focusing enough on the bigger picture. INTJs see ISTPs as the James Bonds to their MI6. ISTPs are executors. They do stuff. They prize action. INTJs are more in the planner category. They want to map things out ahead of time as much as possible. So there's a brilliant synergy between strategist and tactician. INTJs will see ISTPs as being quite similar to them in their problem-solving nature, except expert at navigating the real-time situations. I think about James Bond being on the ground level, carrying out the more high-level vision of the people at the head of MI6, or maybe a tactical general like Erwin Rommel, mastering the real-time battles and blitzkriegs whilst fitting into the overarching vision of his, boss. I'm sure there are some ISTP-INTJ duos that don't involve murder. Probably. INTJs would see ENFJs as their social guides or critics. ENFJs are great with NI, the dominant function of the INTJ, but ENFJs are even better with FE, the worst function of the INTJ. So there's this unusual dynamic at play. Either ENFJs will be able to bridge that gap using their commonalities with INTJs and help them navigate the social realm much better if the INTJ is receptive to that and desiring of it, or INTJs will get really annoyed by ENFJs insisting upon or imposing social smoothness, biting their tongue, adjusting themselves to suit the vibe of a situation, bending their words sometimes, in their mind, to the point of losing all meaning and impact, all for the sake of people's sensitivities, which to INTJs can be quite a stupid reason. INTJs will enjoy interacting directly with ENFJs. They'll find them insightful and engaging. The problems might come from how the ENFJ thinks the INTJ should be acting with other people. So the way that INTJs see ENFJs will largely depend on whether the INTJ actually values what they have to offer. INTJs see ENTPs as people who will challenge them in refreshing and worthwhile ways. Some people, you will be shocked to know, find ENTPs annoying. ENTPs prod and poke. They will give you a run for your intellectual money in the best possible way. Watching INTJs and ENTPs getting into it and debating or just discussing is like a heavyweight clash. With ENTPs around, you will come out a sharper, tougher, and all-around better thinker. INTJs will see ENTPs as being an asset for this reason, someone worth having in their cerebral orbit. ENTPs are also the shadow type of INTJs, so they will see shades of themselves within them often. INTJs see INTPs as intellectual and ideational gold mines. It's rare that INTJs will find people more thirsty than they are. Thirsty for knowledge, that is. INTPs are often well read, or well YouTube videoed, at the very least. They possess a penetrating understanding of a wide range of subjects. They can think both critically and creatively, and are able to connect seemingly disparate ideas to generate new insights. And importantly, they want to solidify their knowledge in a way that ends up making it useful to others as well. There's a beautiful mental stimulation cycle that occurs between these two types. Both of them are happy to skip the, well, in their mind, more pointless social niceties and get down to brain business. INTJs will see INTPs as being like the quirky golden goose laying knowledge eggs, which they can make use of. INTJs see ISFJs as people who will take a different path to the same destination. I'm going to focus on one salient thing here that these two types have in common, that shared destination. That is control. I could have mentioned this with many other types, such as ISTJs or INFJs, but those two types have other factors that felt more important to mention. Both INTJs and ISFJs want control over their lives and craft systems of different kinds using different functions to bring this about. INTJs are intuitive types, ISFJs are sensing types. So there is going to be this divide where INTJs are willing to risk things on strategies and systems that work in theory, whereas ISFJs want to see something more tangible. They want to see something stand the test of time, or just the test of reality, but they both want the same outcome. Also, SI and NI function in similar ways. They both want to narrow down, spot patterns, come to conclusions. They just have a preference for different kinds of data to base those things on. So INTJs will see ISFJs as people with quite a relatable approach to life. INTJs see ESFJs as people who are too social, not just for their own good, but for everyone's. ESFJs are alien to INTJs, which is funny because INTJs are aliens to everyone else. These two types will have regular clashes if they are forced to interact. If it's by choice, that's different. There are ways in which they can get along great, but the potential for conflict is massive. The dominant function of each type is the blind spot of the other. That means that they won't value what the other party is offering lots of the time. Probably more common, though, is misunderstandings. For example, the ESFJ might ascribe malicious intent to the INTJ when they're just being themselves. They might also take offense on behalf of other people who the INTJ is interacting with, which can be very annoying. INTJs will see ISFPs as people who elicit the artistry and emotion within them. INTJs are one part rational scientist, one part mystical magician, and one part aesthetic beauty-seeking artists. These two types have the same functions, but in a slightly different order, so on any given day, they can resemble each other. INTJs, like INFJs, can be unexpectedly particular and intense about, for want of a better word, beauty. in all areas. This pops up in many places in their life. In their fashion sense, INTJs might be very particular, perhaps always wanting to be really well put together, or having a signature outfit, or having a specific approach where they intentionally keep things minimalistic. If they were to criticize something, God forbid, music, books, TV series, whatever, lack of artistry will often be cited in some form as a reason why they dislike it. So they will see ISFPs as people who embody the artistic and emotional side of them. Not necessarily warm and fuzzy emotions. It can be fiery passion, forceful intensity, but it's about following those things, those emotions, those instincts, those values, in an uncompromising way. I have often mentioned the underrated extent to which INTJs are deeply emotional people. INTJs see INFPs as fellow fantasy world-dwelling, intuitive idealists of a different flavour. Yes, that's right, INTJs are idealistic. Both of these types look at the world, or society, and think or feel that things need to be different. They have different ways of going about it, and might even focus on different aspects of the world altogether, but they usually both want change. They want improvement. They want people to be better than they often are. They're also two of the most imagination inhabiting types. I think this is slightly different to being in their heads. An INTP, for example, might be in their head, pondering and calculating, but not necessarily always in their imagination. But these two types can really inhabit those imaginary worlds for long periods of time, during certain parts of their life, maybe even most of the time. It's a world, their own individual world, that's the source of much inspiration. INTJs will see INFPs as people of a similar ilk and spirit that shows up in a different way. INTJs see ESTJs as people who are efficiently and effectively going around in circles. INTJs will be impressed by the sheer amount that ESTJs get done day in and day out. They'll see someone driven, like them, to be productive and create systematic ways of eliminating problems. However, ESTJs have NI, the dominant function of the INTJ, as their blind spot. So yes, the INTJ will see the ESTJ as being brilliant day to day, but not connecting each day together in a way that is leading somewhere. Essentially, in the eyes of the INTJ, they lack a sense of the long term, the bigger picture, or the underlying patterns that, once uncovered, are illuminating. They can make a great team for this reason. INTJs can make sure that ESTJs are pointing their titanic energy and force of will in a direction that will make it worthwhile. INTJs see me much more if they are subscribers. And if you want to see me more up close and personal, then join the Love Who Discord server. The link for that is down below.